This conference will now be recorded.
In last session, we were discussing about what is Kubernetes. We discussed about Kubernetes architecture, and also we discussed the types of Kubernetes clusters. Today, we'll try to set up Kubernetes cluster using self-managed. Primarily, there are two types of Kubernetes cluster: self-managed and managed. So what is managed Kubernetes cluster? Like we have EKS, AKS, GKE. These things. Self-managed, we have Minikube. We can set up using Kubedium. Using Kubedium, we can set up multi-node Kubernetes cluster. Multi-node Kubernetes cluster. Minikube, it's a single node Kubernetes cluster which can be used for local development. Not for production workloads. Now, first I'll try to set up a Kubernetes cluster, self-managed, using Kubedium. Okay. Nitin, for your question, you'll understand maybe later. As I already told, why do we need external load balancer? Even though we are using Docker and Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, within the cluster there will be a load balancing. One application want to talk to other application. But how about end users, the external users, the users which they want to access from different networks, from internet? Will they able to access using the service names within the cluster, which we already discussed? Does end users will be able to reach your Docker servers, Kubernetes servers directly? Within the cluster, there is a load balancing. We can scale the containers, we can scale up, scale down. We can access those containers within the cluster using service DNS within the service. What about end users? Does end users will be able to access directly? For end users, you have an external load balancer. For end users, you will have an external load balancer. Request goes to external load balancer. That external load balancer will route the traffic to your Kubernetes or Docker nodes. So we have a ELB to your Kubernetes or Docker nodes. What the Docker node does, it will send the traffic to the containers, right? Load balancer, external load balancer. So external load balancer route the traffic to Kubernetes node using what? If you are using Docker, will I able to define my host IP, host port? If you understand the load balancing concept, reverse proxy, Docker node, can I define all those proxy rules, reverse proxy? Then the request goes to your Docker server. What Docker server does? Does the Docker server route the traffic to the respective containers? If there are multiple containers within the cluster, it does the load balancing. So this is what? External load balancer to the Docker nodes to the containers. So within the cluster, we will have service discovery. We already covered what is service discovery. Suppose within the cluster, one application A want to talk to application B. Application A want to talk to application B. So here, can they use service name? This application A can talk to service, application B using service name, right? So external load balancer, in the reverse proxy, you define your Kubernetes nodes, basically your worker nodes, host name, I mean to say IP address and port. You can define master also, but master is not required. You can define all your worker machine details, right? If you understand the concept correctly, you can apply all these things, which we are going to discuss in Kubernetes. We are going to discuss in Kubernetes what is external load balancing, how it will work, that we will discuss. Okay, but you have to apply the knowledge, guys. That is what the learning. We already discussed what is load balancer, what is external load balancer, what is Docker Swarm. You need to relate all these things. You need to apply all your knowledge. That is what the learning, actual learning. So which I will explain in Kubernetes, like we are going to discuss about service. There will be a load balancer type, service of type load balancer. We have one concept in Kubernetes. There you will get to know how it works. If you have these kind of questions, I would recommend you to ask at the end of the session, not in between, because the topic is getting deviated. Or you can post in the Skype group. Or I recommend you to ask at the end of the session if you have a questions, out of the topic questions. Now let's continue. What is Minikube? Minikube is a single node Kubernetes cluster. Kubidium. Using Kubidium, we can set up multi-node Kubernetes cluster. Now, Aravind is asking one question. If Docker runtime is deprecated, then if I want to upgrade Kubernetes to have another container runtime, do we have a downtime? We discussed in Docker also. In the Docker, there was a concept called drain. Similarly, in Kubernetes also, there is a concept where you can do one by one, where you can upgrade your nodes one after the other. Like you can drain one of the Kubernetes node, where you can upgrade. Instead of Docker, you can remove the Docker, or you take another group. You take completely new server. Install Kubernetes, I mean to say install different container runtime, and join that machine, and take off one old machine. You can do that maintenance activity in Kubernetes also. The way we have drain, in Kubernetes also you have that concept. Okay. Now, let me set up a Kubernetes cluster, self-managed Kubernetes cluster using Kubidium. So what is the prerequisite, right? I'm taking total 3 servers. for practicing purpose, for demonstrating purpose. One for master, two for workers. What is the minimum capacity for your master machine? Suppose if you want to set up a Kubernetes, minimum capacity for your master, minimum, at least you need a 4 GB RAM and 2 core processor. We cannot set up Kubernetes on T2.micro, at least for master machine, the controller machine, the control plane. The master machine should have minimum this much capacity. Worker machines, I can go for T2.micro, but again, will I able to deploy a lot of applications in this cluster if I have only this much servers with this much resources? Will I able to deploy too many applications in this cluster? No, right? So don't deploy a lot of applications. Delete and deploy the applications. Otherwise, I have to go for high configuration. Maybe I can go for T2 dot large, X large, something like this. T2 dot large, X large, something like this. In real time, are we going to use these type of machines? Only this much configuration, as I already told? No. That depends on what again? How many workers, I mean to say how many servers, and what is the capacity of each server? That depends on what? That depends on the number of applications. Number of applications you want to deploy. Number of applications that you want to deploy in the cluster. Okay. So for now, let's demonstrate with this, right? So I don't have any data center. I don't have any data center. I'm trying to create my machines in AWS. So I'm creating a servers in AWS where I'm trying to set up my cluster. Even though the servers are in AWS, I'm just using EC2, infrastructure as service. Does it mean, will it be a managed Kubernetes cluster or it will be a self-managed? I'm using EC2 and doing the configuration. I'm just using infrastructure from the cloud. So it's a self-managed only. So let me create a servers. I'm creating total 3 servers. I'm taking Ubuntu machines. For master machine, what is the minimum capacity? We need 2 core CPU, 4 GB RAM. So I'm selecting T2.medium. I'm selecting T2.medium. Let me give some tag, something like this. Most importantly, here you need to open some ports. Some ports. Firewall has to be opened for some ports. So for what are the ports which we need to open, right? So here I have explained what ports needs to be opened in the control plane, in the master. So these are the ports which you need to open in the control plane. TCP 6443. TCP 6443. For which purpose? What process is using this port? If you see what process is running on that port, what process will be going to listen on that port? API server. And you need to open 2379 and 2380. For which purpose? That is used by etcd. That is used by etcd, right? So basically this 6443 is most important. What process is listening on that one? Basically API server. What is that API server? We discussed architecture. API server is the kind of a front end for all the Kubernetes request. So we need to open this 6443 port, which is most important. Then 2379 and 2380 for etcd. 10250. What will be listening or what is running on that process on that port? Kubelet API. Kubelets. What is kubelet? What is kubelet? Kubelet is a agent, node agent, primary node agent. As I already told, in the control plane, in the master also you will have a kubelet. So 10250 kubelet, this one for scheduler, this one for control manager. Apart from these, you need to open few other ports also, like network ports. Apart from this, you are going to open few other ports, network ports, that I will explain later. We need to open all these ports in the control plane. Without opening these ports, will you be able to set up the cluster? Because master has to communicate with worker, worker has to communicate with master, and workers will talk to each other. Without opening these ports, will you be able to set up the cluster? Does cluster setup will be successful? No. You need to open all these ports. For now, yes, kubelet is required in the master also. In the architecture also I have explained. But that is not in the architecture perspective. We will not highlight kubelet in the master. Kubelet is required in the master also, because that is also one node. That is one node, master node. So in each and every node you will have a kubelet. But architecture perspective, we are not going to explain kubelet in the master. Only we will highlight only these things. But in the master also you will have a kubelet and kubeproxy. In the last session I already explained this. Now in the worker machines, you need to open this port. What is running on 10250? In worker nodes, you need to open this port 10250. What is going to run on that 10250? That kubelet. For now, I am going to open something like this. All traffic, but not everywhere. Not everywhere. Not everywhere. So we are not going to open for everywhere. I am going to open this one for only. Is it a best practice like this? In real time, do you allow all ports for all the all the ranges? Is it a best practice in the real time? No. So you are going to open only required ports for required ranges. That is the best practice. Now, even though I'm saying all traffic, I'm not opening for everything. I'm going to open for the network, only within the network. So what is this? What is this? I'm giving here the CIDR, the network range. So I'm opening the firewall, all the traffic only for this range. What is this range? This is the VPC in which I am creating a Kubernetes cluster. In which I am creating my Kubernetes cluster. So your worker machines, master machine, all will be within this range. In that case, will they able to communicate? If worker is also in the same range, same network, does worker will be able to reach master on any port since I am opening all traffic? Yes. So I am opening for this range all the traffic. I created one machine. Similarly, let me create two more machines for workers. Let me create two more machines for workers. Workers for practicing purpose, T2.micro is okay. I am again taking Ubuntu servers. One second. By default, I think this is selected nowadays, T3.micro. Let me select this one, T2.micro, free tier eligible. What is happening? Let me, okay. Let me select Ubuntu, T2.micro. I am taking two servers. I am creating the servers in this VPC. Now, if you want to have these machines, worker machines in two different availability zones, can I do one after the other? Like first I'll create one machine in one availability zone. Next I'll create one more machine in 1B availability zone. If you want to distribute your servers in a different zones within that region in AWS, that you can do. That you can do. Okay. Now I'm just creating two servers wherever it can create. Now here also I will open all traffic, but not for everywhere, only for this range. If you miss to open these firewalls, your cluster setup will not work. Now I created total 3 servers, one for master, two for workers. Now Nitin is asking, can we also have a master workers across different VPC or multi-cloud? If you really understand cloud concept, you can answer that. Whether my machine is in same VPC, different VPC, same account, different account, or same cloud, different cloud, master has to communicate with worker. worker has to communicate with master. If there is a network route, can I have, if there is a network connectivity between the master, which is in my account, and worker is in a different account, if there is a network route, there is a network between my network and the other network in which I have a worker, will I able to set up? Can anyone answer? Master has to communicate with worker, worker has to communicate with master. That can be in any where. If they don't have a connectivity network route, will I able to set up the cluster if my worker is in some different network? If you really need to have that kind of a infrastructure, if you really need that kind of a cluster, do I need to have a network routes, network connectivity between those cloud, or that can be VPC, that can be different cloud, that can be on-prem with cloud? You need to have a network routes, network connectivity. So in that case, I can have master in one account, I can have a worker in different account, same region, different region, it can be in a different cloud. But do we really have that kind of architecture in real time? No, right? Very complex architecture. You are not going to have that kind of architectures. Very rare. You see, your clusters will spread across different accounts or different regions. But for high availability, for DR and high availability, will I able to set up one Kubernetes cluster in one region? And for DR, disaster recovery, will I able to set up one more Kubernetes cluster as a disaster recovery DR in another region? Another region. That we will follow. For DR, you will have a one more cluster in other region. For production, you will have one cluster in main region. If something goes wrong with that one, can you switch your traffic to the DR, disaster recovery, DR cluster? You will switch the traffic to the DR cluster. That kind of architecture we will follow. But same cluster, you will not spread into multiple accounts, multiple regions, or multiple clouds. That is very rare. Okay. But if you really want to set up, what is required between those regions or accounts or clouds? You need to have a network connectivity routes. Otherwise, you can't set up. Now, someone is asking this question, sir, if I have any problem, if I have something like this, will it cause any problem? This is just an identification purpose. Are these things will be used within your server, or I'm just tagging this server metadata? We are just tagging these servers. So it's a metadata. It's a metadata. So it is not going to cause any issues. Guys, please be on mute. Haridas. Mr. Haridas, please be on mute.
Okay, ma'am. So 1 second, ma'am. I will just add her to the call.
This is how serious people are attending. Okay. If you see, I'm telling to Haridas, he's talking to someone else. He's not at all listening our class. I don't know what is the use of attending the class. He can aram se sleep for another 1 hour. If you are not serious about the course, better don't join in Mithun Technologies. It will save your money and your time. Okay. If you are really serious, then only join the course in Mithun Technologies. If you are not serious about the course, what you want to learn, better don't join. Mithun Technologies is not the right place for you. So this is just a metadata, guys. You can have anything, just key value pair for identification purpose. You can give anything like this. Now, I have all the servers in same network, same VPC. Will they able to communicate with each other now by default? Now my master machine, whatever I want to make it as a master, or whatever I want to make it as a worker, all are in a same network. Will they able to communicate with each other? They are in same VPC. They will be able to communicate with each other. Do they have a network route? By default, VPC, we already discussed in VPC. So in VPC, do we have one route table where there is a routing local target? So all are in same VPC. So that VPC has a route table. So this route table, do they have a route? What is the meaning of this? What is the meaning of this? Local route, which means any server within this range, if any destination within this range, the target is local, which means do they need internet? Do they need internet, or they will be able to communicate with each other? Because in the same network, same LAN, same VPC. So they can communicate with each other. There is a route. Now, let's say if I create this server in a different VPC, if I have this server in a different network, let's say one worker machine, let's say this I have in a different VPC, different network, will this will be able to talk to master, or master will be able to talk to this worker by default if they are in two different VPC? Even though you try to join the cluster, even though you try to join this machine to this cluster, will it work without network routes? No. So that we already discussed, right? You need to have VPC peering, you need to define the network routes in the route table, then it can work. Now all are in same network. Now I no need to do all those settings, right? Now I created just three machines. Now is it anything master? Is any machine is a worker as of now? I just labeled as Kubernetes master, Kubernetes worker. Does it really a master? Does it really a worker now? Do they have any relationship with each other? No. Now let me set up the cluster. In all the machines, I need to execute some script, some configurations. From here till here, you have to execute, you have to install these softwares, you have to execute these commands in all the servers, master as well as workers, all the machines. So what we are trying to do? First, we are switching to the root user because I don't want to use sudo commands all the time. So I'm switching to the root user. What we are trying to do here? As a prerequisite, we need to disable the swap memory. We need to disable the swap memory. So what is swap memory? Kubernetes recommended to turn off the swap memory. As a prerequisite, you should disable the swap memory in your Kubernetes machines. What is swap memory? What is swap memory? What it will try to swap? It's saying swap memory. If memory is exhausted, I mean to say, if server is running out of RAM, memory, RAM, if it is running out of memory, RAM, the machine will swap some data from RAM to the storage. I mean to say RAM to the disk. It will move some of the memory, some of the data from memory to storage, RAM to the disk. That has to be disabled if your Kubernetes has to work properly. As a prerequisite, we have to turn off that swap. So we have to disable the swap memory. Then what are we trying to do here? Basically, we are adding the APT keys of the Kubernetes packages. We are adding the APT keys. We are adding the APT repository where we have a Kubernetes, right? We are adding those repository keys and we are installing these softwares: Kubelet, Kubedium, and Containerd. So what is Containerd here? We are going to install Containerd. We are installing Kubelet, Kubedium. What is Containerd here? Containerd is a runtime, container runtime. What is Kubelet? What is Kubelet? Kubelet is a agent process, agent software that has to be installed in all the machines. So this Kubedium, we are installing Kubedium because to set up the Kubernetes cluster, to initiate the control plane, to join the workers to the control plane master, we are using Kubedium software. So this Kubedium software is installed to set up the cluster. Then we need to load some necessary modules. These modules you need to load, you need to do some settings in the Containerd by loading the necessary modules. We are doing this here. Then we are enabling IP tables. In Linux, there is a, in the kernel, in the Linux kernel, there is a concept called IP tables for connection forwarding. So as I already told, in Kubernetes, who is responsible for forwarding the connections? I mean to say forwarding the request to your containers, your pods in the architecture we discussed. We have in the architecture, there is one component called kubeproxy. So this kubeproxy is a network proxy. This kubeproxy is a network proxy. It will enable the service abstraction. This kubeproxy will maintain the network rules, connection rules. This kubeproxy will allow us to communicate with our pods inside the cluster or outside the cluster. So this kubeproxy will use IP tables. We have to enable those IP tables by executing this command. Then we are starting kubelet, we are starting kubelet service and enabling. So all these things is common for all the machines. What is meaning of all the machines? I need to execute all these commands in all the machines, in the sense, in this machine, in this machine, in this machine, irrespective whether it's a master, whether it's a worker, it's common for all these machines. Now let me do it. Let me connect to these machines. Guys, I'm going to do parallelly, in the sense, I'm going to execute these commands parallelly in all the machines, not one after the other. But when you guys are doing, just do one machine after the other. When you guys are doing, first connect to one machine, execute all these commands from here to here, from here to here. First connect to one machine and execute, then take other machine. But I am going to do it parallelly to save some time, but I suggest you to go one after the other, because if you miss one of the command, or if you miss some of the instructions, some of the commands you have not executed, the cluster will not, you will not able to set up. So do it carefully, but I am going to do parallelly. Let me connect to all these machines. Let me split. I am going to do it parallelly. You do it one after the other. Okay. So let me connect to those two machines also here. Let me connect to this machine. Let me connect to this machine also. Guys, it's just an installation. Whatever way you want to install, you can install. Do I need to by heart all these commands? Do I need to by heart all these commands? Does anyone can remember all these commands in their mind? Never ever learn that way. Okay. So no one can remember these, like no one can type or remember, no one can remember all these things. Okay. So in the interview also, they are not going to ask you to set up the cluster. If they ask you to set up the cluster also, what I will do, I'll go to that Kubernetes website. I'll go to the Kubernetes website, documentation, right? I can install, right? Install, set up a Kubernetes cluster. So here, whatever I have here, same thing I have documented in the running nodes, right? We are installing these softwares, right? All these things. Don't by heart anything which is not required, right? Sometimes in the interview, they may ask you to write a Docker file. In the Docker file also, they will expect whether you are using a right instructions or not. You no need to remember like https colon dot, that complete URL. You want to download something, you no need to by heart. Just give the instruction and what syntax you will use. Sometimes in the interview, they will ask you to write a Kubernetes manifest files. So in that case, you need to write manifest files, right? So don't by heart anything. Concept is important, not the commands. If this command doesn't work, I will search in the internet, I will work with other, I will use other commands. Now I connected to 3 machines parallelly. Now you do it one after the other, guys. I am using one software called iTerm in MacBook. This is SSH client. SSH client. The way you have a putty, the way you have a mobile extern, I am using this SSH client for Mac. So I'm going to parallelly send the instructions to all these cells. Now if I type the command here in one shell, do you see is same command is getting executed in another shell also, like this machine, this machine, this machine. So this is one software. You no need to worry about this. I am using one software in my MacBook, SSH client. You do it one after the other, same commands. Okay. Now I switch to the root user. I am disabling the swap memory. In all the machines, same command is getting executed, but you have to do manually when you are doing. This is permanently. In etc fs tab, I am turning off the swap memory permanently. Then update the package manager. I updated the package manager. Then I'm installing some software which is required before installing Kubernetes. Guys, when you are executing these commands, just see whether the command is successfully executed or is there any errors. Don't blindly execute. Make sure that command is successfully executed or not. If there are any errors, don't proceed for further command, next command. Here, I am adding the package key. So that is successful. Now here, I am making an entry in the APT, that package manager list. So if you understand this command, will I able to execute these 3 commands together? What we are doing, you already know what is this cat, what is this EOF. We are creating one file in this folder, and what content we are adding in that file? That package information, that Kubernetes package, that repository information. We are adding this line, then end of the file. I can execute these 3 together or one after the other, right? So let me execute these 3 together. Now that is done. Then again I am updating the package manager. Now here, let me install kubelet, kubedium, containerd, and kubectl. What is kubectl? Do I really need kubectl in all my Kubernetes machines? Do I really need kubectl in my Kubernetes machines? What is kubectl first? What is kubectl? It's a CLI, command line interface. Now, you don't need client also to be part of same machine, right? You have a Kubernetes master, you have a Kubernetes workers. That kubectl is not required, to be frank, in the master also. Can I have a separate machine only for client? Can I install kubectl from this machine? Will I able to execute kubectl commands from this machine? Will I able to talk to my Kubernetes cluster from a separate server altogether? I will install only kubectl in this machine. To be frank, kubectl is not required in the master or workers anywhere. I can have a kubectl in a separate machine. We can have a kubectl in a separate machine altogether. This kubectl can talk to the Kubernetes machine, the API server. Now, I will show this one also later, but instead of taking one more server just to talk to the API, what I am trying to do, I am installing that kubectl in this machine, master machine only. I am installing kubectl, the client software also in the master. But in real time, are you going to SSH to master and execute kubectl commands? In real-time projects, once you get into a project, as a developer, do you get SSH access to the masters, your Kubernetes masters or workers? No. In real time, you can install client software in any machine. What is that client software? Kubernetes client software, kubectl. This can be CI/CD server. This can be basically your CI/CD server like Jenkins, in which you can have a kubectl installed, or it can be DevOps guy laptop or system, DevOps guy or developer system. Here also I can configure, I can have a kubectl client machine. So from this machine also we can talk to the API server. I will show this how to install kubectl only client in a separate machine later. But now instead of taking one more server for client, what I am trying to do? I am trying to install kubectl in the master. So if you understand that kubectl concept, do I really need kubectl in my master workers, in my master or workers? Not required. That can be in any machine. But instead of taking a separate machine, now for contacting my Kubernetes cluster, I am installing kubectl in the master. I will explain how to install only kubectl in a separate machine and how to communicate. I will explain later. For now, let me install. So don't install kubectl in all the machines, which is not required also. So I am not installing kubectl in all the machines, which is not required also. Even though you install, will it cause any issue? Even though you install, will it cause any issue? It will not cause any issue. Okay. So I am installing kubectl only in the master now. I am installing kubectl, this kubelet, kubedium, containerd, kubectl only in the master. But these machines, in these machines, I will not install kubectl. I will install only this here as well as here. Let's wait till this complete. So we installed required softwares. Now this is optional. This is optional. So if you do this, what will happen? If I execute apt mark hold kubelet, kubedium, kubectl, containerd, this is optional. If I does this, what happens? So the package manager will not upgrade these packages automatically. it will not update these packages automatically. That package manager will not update or upgrade these softwares automatically. So let me execute this. So I don't have a kubectl in this machine. Now let me again switch to this mode. This is okay. Now we installed this kubelet, kubedium, and containerd. Now this is required for your containerd to work properly. So let me execute these commands again in all the machines. Execute these commands. In all the machines. Now here we are setting containerd as a runtime. So execute these commands. Guys, I have taken all these commands from the official documentation only, but I have kept it in a proper order. Okay. Then we are going to start the kubelet, and we have to enable. I will enable this kubelet service. So why we need to enable this kubelet service on Bootstrap? Because if I stop the server, if I start the server, does kubelet will be started automatically? If kubelet is not running, does master or worker will be able to report their status? Whether master or worker will they able to report that status? I mean to say, if kubelet is not started, does master machine will be in ready state or worker machine will be in ready state, or it will be shown as down? If there is any issue in kubelet, does master machine will be able to communicate with worker? If kubelet is not running, does master machine will be able to communicate with worker? No. So we installed kubelet, and we are enabling the kubelet on Bootstrap, which means even though I stop the server and start the server, does kubelet process will be automatically started? If I enable the Bootstrap kubelet service on Bootstrap, even though I stop the server and start the server, does kubelet process will be automatically started? Yes. So that's what we are doing here. So we are starting the kubelet service and we are enabling the kubelet on Bootstrap. So execute these commands on all the servers. Before that, did I started containerd process here? If you see, what is containerd? Containerd is basically container runtime. So we started the containerd. Now if you see, is it up and running? Do you have a containerd process, container runtime? It's already there, it is active, right? Similarly, let me enable kubelet. Let me enable kubelet, start kubelet, and let me enable the kubelet on Bootstrap. But if you see, even though you started, sometimes it is not in active state. It is not in active state. You can ignore this one. You can ignore this one. If you see, even though I started kubelet, it is not in an active state. You can ignore this one. This will be activated. This will be coming into the running state once I initialize the cluster. this kubelet service will come into the initialization. I mean to say running state, this kubelet, once I initialize the cluster, once I join the machines. So if you check the status also, you see something like this, but you can ignore this one for now, this kubelet. Now I have installed all the softwares, common softwares, which is required in the masters as well as workers. Now I want to initialize the master, the control plane, the master. So only in the master machine, I'm going to execute this command, kubedium init. I'm going to execute this command, kubedium init, only in the master, the machine which I want to make it as a master. So what this kubedium init does? This kubedium is one software using which we are setting up the cluster. What this kubedium init does? Will it initialize the control plane? I mean to say, will it set up that API server, control manager, scheduler, etcd? Will it initialize that control plane? So it will initialize the control plane. Now which IP it is going to use? The master machine will be initialized on which IP? What IP it is going to use? The private IP. The private IP of that machine. If you want to initialize on a public IP, there is an option. Here it is not advertised. It is not like advertise address. There will be a different option. But as I already know, do I really need to initialize on a public IPs? Your API server, will it be exposed to the internet in real time? Are you going to expose your API server to the internet using public IP? No. Only on a private IP. Private endpoints, not public endpoints. So if I execute this one, this has to be done only in the master. These steps has to be executed only in the master. Now, only in the master I will do. This is the machine which I want to make it as a master. What should be the capacity of this machine? Minimum capacity, as I already told. Minimum 4 GB RAM and 2 core CPU. Okay. So switch to the root user. Why I am switching to the root user? Because I don't want to execute this with sudo commands. Otherwise, I need to execute this one with sudo command. So I already root user. I am going to execute this command in this machine, which I want to make it as master. So what this does basically, what this kubedium init does basically, it is going to set up, or it is going to initialize using kubedium. It is going to set up the cluster. Now same commands, set of commands, will I able to do it using Ansible playbook? Whatever commands I have executed manually, will I able to have all these commands as a playbooks and execute using Ansible? You can do that if you know Ansible. But using Terraform, I can automate the infrastructure, not the configuration. Using Terraform, I can automate the infrastructure, not configuration. But if it is a EKS cluster, will I able to provision EKS cluster using Terraform? Yes. But if it is a EKS cluster, do I need to do all these things? Or in the background, AWS does all these things for us? Do I need to do all these things if I go for a EKS? No. AWS will do for us in the background, right? So you can automate this process by, if you want to create a EKS cluster, instead of manually creating from console, you can do that using Terraform. Or if it is a self-managed cluster, you can execute whatever commands I have executed in the form of playbook, if you know Ansible. You can have all these instructions in an Ansible playbook and you can execute a playbook if you don't want to do it manually. Now, I have initialized Kubernetes cluster. Now I got this output. The moment I execute kubedium init, I executed kubedium init. So I got output like this. Your Kubernetes control plane has been initialized successfully. Now, which means, does my master machine is initialized successfully? The control plane, the master. Yes. So how to interact with my Kubernetes control plane? Now I want to interact with my Kubernetes control plane. I want to see how many nodes are there. What is required? How can I interact with my Kubernetes control plane? That Kubernetes control plane master. What is required? With the help of what we can interact? What is the client software? What is the client software? kubectl. So the kubectl is installed in this machine. I have a kubectl. If I just install kubectl, I have a kubectl in this machine. I have a kubectl in this machine. If I just have a kubectl, does it mean will I able to communicate? If you see, I have a kubectl. Am I able to talk to the API server to see how many nodes are there, to see how many pods are there in this cluster? If I just have a kubectl, does it mean will I able to communicate with my Kubernetes cluster? No. So what is required? Does this client software requires some configuration to know where exactly Kubernetes is running, on which IP, on which port that API server is running, the username or password or certificates which is required to connect to the Kubernetes? Do we need to have all those details for this kubectl to communicate? Yes. So if you see here, your Kubernetes control plane has been successfully initialized. To start using your cluster, you need to run the following commands as a regular user. If you understand these commands, what we are trying to do? We have a kubectl. What we are trying to do using these commands? We are configuring that kubectl. So this kubectl is expecting one file. That kubectl is expecting one file called config file, kubeconfig file. So if you see, they are saying execute these commands as a normal user, a regular user. If you see, we are trying to create one directory called .kube. Here we are trying to create one directory called .kube, and we are trying to configure that kubeconfig. So this is in the master machine. This file is in the master machine. We are copying that file to this .kube location. So what this file contains? If you see, in the master, we have one file. What that file contains, if you see, does that file contains the server in the sense API server? Do we have the details like Kubernetes details? What is this IP and what is this port? That file contains the Kubernetes API server details. What is this IP? What is this port? 6443. What is that? What is running on 6443? API server. API server. And what is this IP? that master machine IP. So this file contains the cluster details, where exactly API server is running, and the certificates to connect to communicate with Kubernetes API server. We are using root user, admin user certificates, which means if I configure a CLI, Kubernetes CLI with this config file, does that that client will be able to do any operation in the Kubernetes, since it is using administrator user certificates and administrator user. Wherever I have this kubeconfig file in any machine, will I able to perform any operation in the Kubernetes cluster, since we are using admin user, admin configurations, the Kubernetes administrator. It can perform any operation. Now, if I have this kubeconfig file, this file in another server also, let's say here I will install kubectl. I will create that kube folder, and within that kube folder, I will create this config file. I'll create this config file, and if I have this content, admin configuration, this content in this file, if I have a kubectl and kube configure, this kubectl is configured. If I execute kubectl commands, will it talk to the API server and get the details from this machine also? If I have a kubectl, if I have a kube config file from this machine, will I able to execute kubectl commands? Will I able to talk to the Kubernetes cluster? Now, if I install only kubectl, I have a kube config file, we can do that. But does this machine is a master machine, or does this machine will be a worker machine, or it is just a normal machine, client machine? It's just a normal machine, right? Now, here itself I have a kubectl. Here itself I have a kubectl. Now, these commands I am executing as a normal user in the same machine, as a normal user. Let me exit from the root user. As a Ubuntu user, I am executing these commands. Now, we created a, in the current user home directory. In the current user home directory, we have a kube folder, we have a config file. Now, we have a kube config file, this file. We have a kube config file. Let me change the ownership, okay? So the next command is changing the ownership. So let me change the ownership. Now, this is the ownership we have changed. Now, I have that file. I have a kubectl. Now, am I able to interact with my Kubernetes cluster with the help of kubectl? Now, am I able to see? I will be able to interact with this one. Now, in real time, if you will be using EKS, EKS is integrated with IAM. EKS is integrated with IAM. So you can get the kube config file and you can use your IAM user. Or will I have, in real time, the Kubernetes also will be integrated with LDAP. Kubernetes also integrated with LDAP. In real time, does everyone will have an admin access to the Kubernetes, guys? In real time, does everyone will have an admin access to Kubernetes? No. So Kubernetes can be integrated with LDAPs, and here also we have a roles permissions concept that we will discuss in a separate session. RBAC. There is a concept called RBAC in Kubernetes, where we have a we can define role-based access control. This we will discuss in a separate session. So as of now, which kubeconfig I am using? I am using admin kubeconfig. So in that case, do I have all the access to all the resources in my Kubernetes? Will I able to do anything, whatever I want to do in this Kubernetes cluster if I am using admin privileges? Yes. Now, how many nodes I have? How many nodes I have as of now? How many nodes I have? Only one. That node is what? That node is what? That node is a master control manager. If you see this kubectl in the background, what it is using, guys? I'm kind of a printing logs in the background. Printing logs in the background. If you see, I'm executing kubectl commands, but in the background it is what actually? In the background, what is happening actually? It's kind of a API call. So this kubectl is making what? This kubectl is making what? It's making a API calls to the control plane, the master. Do you see? Is it using that kubeconfig file? If you see, is it using that kubeconfig file for authentication and authorization purpose? I'm just printing some additional logs using this option. If you observe in the background, is it executing some code, some APIs? The log mode -v, verbose log level, log level. Just I want to see what is happening when I'm executing this command. What is happening in the background? I want to see. So kind of additional logs. Do you see? Is it making one API call on this URL, on this? So it's basically a Kubernetes request is going to Kubernetes API server in the background. It is getting a response from that API server. It's basically an API call. Now, the kubectl is communicating with API server and processing this command. If you see why it is not ready so far, I have only one node. Why it is not ready? Let me tell you what is the problem. If you see the Kubernetes control plane, the Kubernetes master, the API server, scheduler, etcd, these also running as what? These also running as pods, Kubernetes pods. If you see etcd is ready, API server is ready, control manager is ready, kubeproxy is also ready, scheduler is also ready, all are running. But if you see these DNS pods, we have a core DNS, Kubernetes DNS. So we will have a DNS within the cluster. We have a DNS within the cluster, domain name service. We have a service discovery. So why this DNS is important in Kubernetes? Within Kubernetes, if one application has to talk to other application, do we need to depend on IPs of the nodes or pods? Do I need to depend on the IPs of the nodes or pods if one application has to talk to other application within the cluster? We no need to depend on IPs of the nodes or pods. there is a DNS component. So the DNS, the name to the IPs. So within the cluster, we can use the names, service names for communication, which is going to internally register that service to the IP in this DNS. These parts are not ready. These parts are in a pending state. These parts are in a pending state. All these parts are in a pending state. These core DNS parts. All these parts are Kubernetes related stuff. Is all these parts, whatever as of now we have, is it our application parts? Did we deploy first of all any application so far? We have not deployed any application so far. These are Kubernetes parts. So these parts are in a pending state because we have not created any network, pod networking. These parts are in a pending state because there is no network created, network plugin. As I already told, in Kubernetes also we have some networking concept. There is a concept called CNI. There is a concept called CNI, Container Networking Interface. It's a standard or specification. Rules. So set of rules, set of guidelines defined for container networking. So there is a concept called CNI, Container Networking Interface. It's a standard. There are lot of implementations. There are lot of implementations for this one. So we have ViewNet, we have Calico, we have Flannel. There are network implementations. So we need to have these networks deployed. We need to have one of this network, any network. Kubernetes network plugins. So we need to have these add-ons, these networks. So we have a lot of networking like Calico. It's a network, container networking plugin. We have a Calico, we have a Flannel, we have ViewNet, like this. All are like a network drivers, network implementations for containers. So any one of these networking plugin can be used. Not all, not everything is required. Either you can use Calico or you can use Flannel or ViewNet. It's like a overlay drivers, network drivers, right? So we need to apply these network drivers. So because there is no networking created, there is no network driver, network plugin is available. So these parts are not able to come up because there is no network drivers available. Now, let me apply one of the network plugin. If you see, as I already told here, you will notice some parts are in a pending state because we don't have any networking driver. So using this command, what I am trying to do, basically using this command, I am trying to deploy, or I am trying to deploy that networking plugin, networking driver. So what networking plugin I am installing? If you see here, the ViewNet networking plugin. So I am installing this ViewNet networking plugin. Now if you see now, do I have that networking plugin pod also trying to come up? That networking driver also trying to come up here. Once this network driver is fully up and running, these pods also will come into the running state. Now do you see, is these pods are running now, which were in a pending state after deploying this network plugin? Now my cluster is ready. I mean to say, is my master is ready completely? Is my control plane is ready completely? Yes. Now all these are Kubernetes related pods. So we need some plugin, network plugin. As I already told, there is a standard. There is a standard called CNI, Container Networking Interface. CNI stands for Container Networking Interface. All these are implementation for this networking. So we have a Flannel, we have a Calico, we have a ViewNet, right? Most of them are overlay drivers, right? Some will have some additional features, some may have just overlay features, right? You can use either ViewNet, either Calico, either Flannel. If I go for EKS, they have their own implementation. So if I go for a EKS, by default, the EKS is going to use this CNI. Their own CNI is there. They have implemented their own container networking interface. That is like a driver, network driver. So what is the responsibility of these network drivers? Basically these network plugins, which is responsible for allocating IP addresses. IP addresses for what? Allocating or managing IP addresses and its routing for what? Pods. This network drivers is responsible for allocating IP address for pods and its routing. This is pod networking, container networking. In AWS, we have a server networking. What is that server networking? VPC. That is for server to server communication. Here, this CNI, this container networking interface is responsible for allocating, managing IP addresses. IP addresses for what? IP addresses for servers or IP addresses for the pods which we are deploying in Kubernetes. IP addresses for pods. Okay. So we have these drivers you can use. If I go for EKS, by default it will be using that EKS CNI. In self-manage, you can use ViewNet, Calico, Flannel, all this, whatever out of this network plugins. Now I have my master machine is ready. How can I join the workers to this cluster? I have only one master now. If you see, I have master. How can I join these machines to the workers? So here it will give a token. The master machine will give a token. But again here guys, there is no master token. There is no master token. Here it is only worker token. If you want to set up multi-master Kubernetes cluster, altogether it's a different process. If you want to set up multi-master Kubernetes cluster, altogether it's a different process. There is no master token here. It will give only worker token. So now let me get that worker token. I can execute this command. It will give the worker token. So this command I can execute in these machines. If you see this token, what do we have in this token? What is this? Basically, your API server and your API server where exactly it is running. So I can take this token and execute this token in this machine. If I don't open this port in this machine, in this firewall, this machine will be able to communicate with this machine on this port if I don't open the firewall? No. That's why the ports are very important. So let me take this token and execute here as a root user. Otherwise, you need to use a sudo command. If you are trying to execute this as a normal user, you need to use a sudo command. Otherwise, execute as a root user. Now, this Kubernetes is initializing something here. It's a worker machine. So this Kubernetes is trying to set up what in this machine basically? In the worker, what do we have? In the worker, you will have a kubelet and what else? Kube proxy. Now, this machine joined this node. Now, how many nodes are part of my cluster now? How many nodes, total nodes? How many nodes are part of my cluster? 2 nodes. Out of which, how many masters, how many workers? 1 master, 1 worker. Same token I can execute here. 1 second. Same token I can execute here in the other machine. Now this is also going to be joined as a worker here in this cluster. Now total how many nodes I have? It will be ready in some time. It will be ready in some time. Total I have 3 machines. All the 3 machines will be ready in some time. It will take some time. The kubelet, the kube proxy will be ready in some time. Now total I have 3 machines. Out of 3 machines, how many masters, how many workers? Now all are ready. Now all are ready. How many masters, how many workers in this cluster? 1 master, 2 workers. Suppose if I want to add few more workers, what needs to be done? Do I need to install these softwares in that machine, the common softwares like this one? Do I need to have all these things done in that machine, then another machine? Then after installing all these softwares, can I execute that worker token? Can I get the token from the master and can I execute that token in the worker so that it will be reported? It will be reported. Now let me close all these things. I don't need anything now. So here, this is my cluster. I have a master and I have a worker. So how I am interacting with master? With the help of what I am interacting with master? What is this? kubectl. What is this kubectl? It's a CLI, command line interface. As I already told, can I have this kubectl in a separate machine altogether? Now, I can have kubectl in my laptop installed. I can have a kubectl installed in my laptop also. I can have a kubectl installed in my laptop. But if I just install kubectl, if I execute kubectl commands, will it work from my laptop? No. What we need? We need to have a kube config. Now, I have initialized Kubernetes on a private IP, private endpoint, not on a public IP. Even though I have a kube config file in my laptop is in different network. My laptop is in internet, and my Kubernetes is in a different network. Even though I have a kube config file in my laptop, will I able to communicate with Kubernetes machine? I mean to say API server. It is initialized on a private IP. There is no network route. But if using VPN concept or some other concept, using VPN, if my laptop is also becomes part of the network, office network, let's say, if my laptop, if I connected via VPN, if I connected to the VPN, if my laptop becomes to be part of same network where my cluster is running, in that case, will you able to talk to the Kubernetes clusters which is running in your office network? Yes, that is how it works. Now, if I have a one more server like Jenkins server in a same VPC or different VPC pairing, if I have a one more server, normal server, that can be any type of server, that can be a Jenkins server, any other server. I'm creating one server in the same network, same VPC, where I have a cluster. So in this server, if I install only kubectl, if I have that kubeconfig file in the server, will I able to communicate? Since this server is also part of same network, same VPC. Now this is just a client machine. It is just a client machine. This can be a Jenkins server like any other server. This can be a Jenkins server or any other server. Now in this server, if I install only kubectl and if I configure kubeconfig, I can communicate. Now let me connect to this server. There are different ways to install kubectl. Using package manager, you can install. Using zip file, you can download the kubectl zip file and install. So this server is not ready. Let's wait for some time. Still it is coming up. This machine, still it is coming up. Let's wait. Now this is not going to be a master machine. This is not going to be a worker machine. I can install kubectl. I don't have a kubectl. I can install kubectl. Whatever way you want to install. Install kubectl. You can install kubectl. So in a Linux, I want to install. I'm downloading this kubectl software. I downloaded that kubectl software. Then I'm installing that kubectl software. I'm moving that kubectl or I'm installing that kubectl in user local bin. Now I have a kubectl. I have a kubectl. If I just have a kubectl, does it mean am I able to talk to the Kubernetes cluster? If you see from this machine, am I able to talk to the Kubernetes machine? No. What it is expecting, it is not because of network issue. First of all, by default, it is trying to talk to this localhost 8080. Because first of all, did I have that kubeconfig file? Do I have that kubeconfig file configured? Do I have that kubeconfig file in this machine? No. So I'll create, what is the default location where it will expect that kubeconfig file? What is the default location where it will expect? In the .kube, in the config. So first of all, I don't have that folder. Let me create. Now, this is not in my same machine. This is not in the same machine. This is in the master machine. Now, I can take that. I can take that file. In the master, I have that file, right? So in the master machine, I have that file. Let me take that file. Now with this is my kube config, Kubernetes configuration. Now in this machine, I'll create that file. .cube, file name is config. Now I have all this content. Now kube configuration is done. Now if you see, is it able to talk to the cluster now? Is it able to talk to the cluster? Is it able to get the nodes? How many nodes are there? How many pods are there? Now, but is this machine is a master or worker in which I am executing Kubernetes command? Is it part of the cluster? Is it a master or worker? No. Do I have a Kubernetes softwares installed in this machine? Do I have a containerd or Docker, anything? Is it a master or worker? No. It's just a client machine. So from this machine, will I able to talk to the cluster and deploy the applications, update the applications, delete the applications from this machine? Will I able to update, delete, deploy, whatever I want to do? We can do that. So that is CLI, command line interface. So we just set up the cluster. We just set up the cluster. Instead of taking a separate machine, instead of taking a separate machines to configure this client, what I have done, guys? Instead of taking a separate machine and install kubectl and configuring that kubectl, in the master itself, we have done. We installed kubectl in the master itself. We have configured in the master itself. This is master node. In the same node, I have a kubectl also installed, right? So this one, the current node is master. We just done the setup. The actual Kubernetes topics I'll continue tomorrow. So you might be already confused. I am talking about pod. I am not talking about container. I am talking about pod. So sir, what is this pod? You are saying pod. So what is this pod? In Kubernetes, there is a concept called namespace. There is a concept called namespace. What is that namespace? What is this pod? We'll continue tomorrow. Okay. So Chandan is asking, what is the advantage of installing kubectl in a separate server? Now, let's say I have hundreds of developers. Let's say I have DevOps engineers. Are you going to give SSH access to the masters or workers to deploy the applications? Are you going to give SSH access? Does everyone will be able to SSH to the master and execute Kubernetes commands in real time? If you give SSH access, will it cause issues like anyone can execute any commands in the master? They can corrupt the cluster in real time. Not everyone will have a SSH access to all the servers, right? Only administrators will have access. So still I want to use Kubernetes. I am a developer. I want to deploy, right? So we can access from our laptop only. If I have Windows laptop, I can install kubectl in Windows. If I have a kube config file and if there is a network connectivity from my laptop to that control plane, then will I able to communicate? Suppose I have a network connectivity from my laptop to the Kubernetes server where it is running. If I have a kube config file in my laptop, I can install kubectl. If I have a kube config file in my Windows laptop also, I can communicate. The process remains same, but there should be a network. Why I have not installed, why I have not configured kube config in my laptop? Because the Kubernetes is listening on which IP? The API server is listening on which IP? Private IP. Private IP. So that's why I am not able to do that. If you initialize on a public IP, you can do that. If you initialize on a public IP, you can access, you can execute kubectl commands from your laptop also. Okay. But in real time, are you going to advertise on a public IPs? No, because it's a security problem, security issue, security breach. Okay, guys. Today we just set up Kubernetes cluster. Tomorrow, I'm going to explain what is pod, how to deploy the applications in Kubernetes. We'll continue tomorrow. What is namespace? What is pod? We'll understand. Then we will deploy the applications in Kubernetes. Any questions before I stop the session? If you don't have any question, I'm good to stop the session. We'll continue tomorrow, guys. Kubernetes will be little difficult compared to the Docker Swarm. Kubernetes is little difficult compared to the Docker Swarm. You need to revise, you need to read the documents, you need to revise these sessions 1 or 2 times, and you need to practice more. Kubernetes is little tough, little difficult to compare with Docker Swarm. Okay. So I'm going to share the document. I'm going to share the installation step. This document I have already shared, guys. This document I have already shared. Okay. I'm going to share the installation instructions and also running notes if there are any. If there is any running notes, we'll continue tomorrow. Okay. Thank you. I'll stop the session for today. We'll continue tomorrow.